Dr. Evelyn Morse adjusted her unremarkable spectacles and peered through the observation deck's reinforced transparisteel at what could generously be called organized murder. The Kithaeron beside her, all 7 feet of crystalline arrogance wrapped in ceremonial robes, gestured expansively at the carnage below with the enthusiasm of a wine collector showing off vintage bottles. Magnificent, is it not? Vexthul's vocal cords produced sounds like grinding quartz. Your species expresses such curiosity about combat methodology. I thought you would appreciate seeing how truly advanced civilizations approach the art of conflict resolution. Evelyn made a non-committal sound that could have been agreement or mild indigestion. Her fingers moved across her tablet, ostensibly taking academic notes about gladiatorial customs, actually cataloging security protocols and structural weak points. The nexus sprawled beneath them like a malignant flower, tier upon tier of luxury seating surrounding a central killing floor where beings fought, bled, and died for the entertainment of creatures who considered themselves enlightened. The betting algorithms alone represent a triumph of mathematical sophistication, Vexthul continued, apparently mistaking her silence for awe. We have eliminated the crude unpredictability that plagued ancient combat sports. Each match is precisely calculated to maximize emotional investment while ensuring profitable outcomes. Fascinating. Evelyn's tone suggested she found tax documentation more thrilling. And the participants volunteer for this privilege? The question hung in the recycled air like a badly concealed weapon. Vexthul's crystalline features shifted through what might have been embarrassment on a species capable of shame. Well, volunteer is perhaps technically accurate. Newly incorporated species often find themselves with significant debts to the hegemony. Combat service provides an opportunity to discharge these obligations honorably. How remarkably convenient. Evelyn made another note. Below, a reptilian creature with too many limbs was systematically dismembering something that might once have been sentient. The crowd's roar suggested this exceeded their modest expectations for afternoon entertainment. Your academic perspective is refreshing, Vexthul said, though his tone suggested refreshment was not the word he would have chosen privately. Most representatives from developing worlds become distressingly emotional when exposed to advanced cultural practices. Evelyn had attended 17 academic conferences, survived a doctoral defense, and endured countless faculty meetings. Distressing emotion was not among her available responses. What exactly qualifies as advanced about encouraging violence for profit? The sophistication lies in the control, naturally. Primitive species simply let violence occur randomly. Wars, territorial disputes, resource conflicts. We have refined it into a precise instrument of social utility. The weak provide entertainment value, the strong earn glory and economic advancement, and society benefits from the elimination of unsuitable genetic material. The narrator observing this conversation might have noted that Vexthul was explaining his civilization's crown achievement to a member of a species that had spent several millennia turning warfare into both an art form and a science, then eventually grew bored with it. The cosmic joke was lost on everyone except possibly Evelyn, who was developing what appeared to be genuine academic interest. "Tell me about your champion," she said, indicating the figure dominating the center arena. The creature moved like liquefied aggression, its cybernetic enhancements gleaming under the stadium lights. Zefkar represents the pinnacle of our selective breeding and enhancement programs, undefeated in 347 consecutive matches. We have invested considerable resources in his continued success. And his opponents? Carefully selected to provide appropriate challenge levels while ensuring favorable outcomes. Risk management is essential to maintaining investor confidence. Evelyn watched Zefkar tear through a squad of what appeared to be warriors from a recently conquered system, Their equipment was antiquated, their coordination poor, their fate predetermined. The crowd's bloodlust reached crescendo as the last defender fell. "Remarkable efficiency," she observed, "though I wonder about long-term sustainability. Surely audiences grow bored with predictable results." "We employ sophisticated narrative development specialists to maintain engagement. Each match is embedded within larger storylines designed to maximize emotional investment. Heroes, villains, redemption arcs. Quite primitive concepts, but effective with less sophisticated audiences." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the arena. A new group of fighters had been released, members of a species Evelyn didn't recognize, though their terror was universally comprehensible. They huddled together, clearly untrained, obviously doomed. "Fresh acquisitions from the Outer Rim," Vexthul explained unnecessarily. "Their world defaulted on infrastructure loans last cycle. Their combat debut should prove entertaining." Evelyn made additional notes as the slaughter commenced. The crowd's enthusiasm was infectious in the way that plague might be considered socially engaging. She had seen human audiences react to sporting events with similar fervor, though typically without the literal blood sacrifice. "Do you ever vary the format?" she asked, as the last of the new fighters expired messily. "Introduce unexpected elements?" "Variation would compromise the mathematical models underlying our profit projections. Spontaneity is the enemy of efficient entertainment management." "How thoroughly modern of you." Something in her tone made Vexthul pause. His species had evolved from crystalline matrices, giving them sensitivity to harmonic frequencies that translated roughly to emotional undertones. What he heard in Evelyn's voice was not admiration. "You disapprove of our methods?" "I find them instructive." Evelyn closed her tablet and turned from the viewport. "Thank you for the educational experience. I believe I understand your approach quite thoroughly now." "Will you be staying for the evening matches? We have several special presentations planned." "I wouldn't miss it for anything." Her smile suggested she was looking forward to something that had very little to do with watching fights. Vexthul had invited a human to observe their sophisticated approach to controlled violence. He had failed to consider that humans had been controlling violence for so long they had eventually grown tired of it and moved on to more interesting challenges. The evening's entertainment was going to be considerably more educational than anyone had anticipated. The evening festivities commenced with what Vexthul proudly announced as premium content, a ceremonial execution disguised as combat between Zefkar and 12 representatives of the hegemony's newest territorial acquisition. The doomed fighters possessed wings that would never carry them to freedom, and songs their species would no longer remember. "Standard incorporation protocol," explained Velnira, a hegemony administrator whose presence indicated this event carried political significance, beyond entertainment value. Symbolic subjugation resonates powerfully with newly absorbed populations. Very cost-effective psychological conditioning. Evelyn had positioned herself strategically among the corporate sponsors, her academic credentials providing access to conversations typically restricted to investors and government officials. Her questions had evolved from curious to pointed, though she maintained the harmless demeanor of someone genuinely interested in learning. "These medical provisions seem rather sparse," she observed, reviewing documentation on her tablet. "Are there established protocols for treating combat injuries?" "Treatment implies intent to preserve damaged goods," Velnira replied, with mechanical precision. "Resources allocated to medical intervention represent inefficient capital deployment. Replacement costs are substantially lower than rehabilitation expenses." How wonderfully practical, and fairness regulations. The administrator's expression suggested the concept required translation. "Could you clarify the meaning of this term in the current context?" "Equipment standardization, performance enhancement restrictions, match duration limits, the sort of oversight that maintains competitive integrity. Velnira exchanged glances with several nearby officials. The look suggested they had encountered an alien concept that defied their understanding of physics. Competitive integrity would compromise narrative control, she explained slowly, as if addressing a particularly dim child. Each match requires predetermined outcomes to support larger story structures. Fairness would introduce chaotic variables that could destabilize audience engagement metrics. I see. Evelyn's tone conveyed perfect comprehension of something fundamentally incomprehensible. So the combat is essentially theatrical performance rather than actual contest. Theater suggests entertainment value derived from uncertainty. Our model eliminates uncertainty to guarantee satisfaction delivery. Below them, Zefkar was systematically destroying the winged fighters, while crowd enthusiasm reached calculated peaks. The champion's cybernetic enhancements made the contest as fair as pitting a fusion reactor against a candle. The audience loved it with the passion of beings who had never questioned why they loved it. Your species finds this arrangement satisfactory? Evelyn asked a nearby Zinthari merchant whose betting activities had been remarkably successful throughout the evening. Supremely efficient, the creature replied, its translator rendering emotional satisfaction as mechanical precision. Historical combat suffered from unpredictable variables. Modern methodology eliminates these inefficiencies through superior planning and technological integration. Yet surely audiences must crave some element of genuine surprise. Surprise represents failure of management systems. Satisfaction derives from confirmation of expectations, not contradiction of predictions. Evelyn made careful notes about response patterns while observing the social dynamics surrounding her. The elite viewed themselves as sophisticated consumers of refined entertainment, never recognizing their bloodlust differed from their ancestors only in the comfortable distance technology provided. They had convinced themselves that control equaled evolution. What happens when champions age beyond optimal performance parameters? She inquired during a brief intermission. Retirement ceremonies provide excellent narrative closure opportunities, Velnira replied. Audiences appreciate definitive endings that validate their emotional investments. Retirement ceremonies? Terminal matches against overwhelming opposition, very popular with demographics that appreciate classical tragedy elements. The casual discussion of orchestrated murder as entertainment programming would have been revolting if it were not so completely predictable. Evelyn had studied enough civilizations to recognize the pattern. Technological advancement without corresponding ethical development, sophistication mistaken for wisdom, control confused with progress. Tell me about your audience demographics, she said, shifting to topics that revealed more than the speakers intended. Primarily hegemony core species with sufficient disposable income to afford premium entertainment experiences, explained Kethmol, the Nexus marketing director whose enthusiasm for statistics exceeded his understanding of their implications. Secondary markets include recently incorporated populations seeking cultural integration opportunities. Cultural integration through violent spectacle? Violence represents universal communication methodology transcending linguistic and cultural barriers. Newly absorbed species achieve belonging through shared experience consumption. The logic was flawless in the way that completely insane propositions often achieved perfect internal consistency. Evelyn had encountered similar reasoning among human societies that had convinced themselves their atrocities were actually benevolence, but rarely with such systematic precision. Have you considered alternative integration methods? The question produced momentary silence, suggesting she had proposed something genuinely radical. Kethmol recovered first, his response carrying the patient tone reserved for explaining obvious facts to confused outsiders. Alternative methods would require extensive research and development investments with uncertain return projections. Current systems have demonstrated consistent profitability across multiple fiscal cycles. Of course, innovation carries risks. Precisely. The hegemony values stability and predictable outcomes over experimental approaches that might destabilize established social structures. The final match of the evening featured what Vexthal described as artistic interpretation. Zefkar versus 30 fighters equipped with historically accurate weapons from their respective homeworlds. The champions' modern enhancements rendered their ancient tools pathetically inadequate, but the visual spectacle satisfied audiences who appreciated educational content blended with entertainment value. Beautiful symmetry, Velnira commented as bodies accumulated. Traditional methods meet modern efficiency. The outcome demonstrates technological superiority while honoring cultural heritage elements. Quite poetic, Evelyn agreed, though her definition of poetry apparently differed significantly from the administrators. As the evening concluded with Zefkar standing victorious amid the wreckage of civilizations, Evelyn thanked her hosts with genuine warmth. She had learned exactly what she needed to know about their systems, their weaknesses, and their complete inability to recognize what she actually represented. "Will you be documenting our methodologies for your academic colleagues?" Vexthul asked hopefully. "Oh yes," Evelyn replied with perfect sincerity. "I expect my findings will generate considerable interest among humans who study primitive social structures." The comment passed without recognition among beings who had never considered that their guests might be conducting their own evaluations. Tomorrow's matches were going to provide educational opportunities none of them had anticipated. The next morning brought what arena management advertised as spontaneous combat exhibition. Essentially, permission for Zefkar to torture volunteers from the audience until they died entertainingly. The champion had developed a taste for psychological torment that significantly extended match duration and increased advertising revenue. Evelyn arrived early, claiming academic interest in observing pre-match rituals. Her access credentials had mysteriously upgraded overnight, granting her proximity to operational areas previously restricted to essential personnel. Security apparently considered human xenoanthropologists inherently harmless. The champion's psychological methodology represents sophisticated crowd manipulation techniques, boasted Thexanar, the head trainer whose cybernetic modifications had replaced whatever capacity for shame his species might once have possessed. Fear amplification generates superior emotional responses compared to simple physical violence. Remarkable innovation, Evelyn replied, while casually examining the neural interface systems that controlled Zefkar's enhancement suite. Her fingers traced connection pathways with the practiced ease of someone intimately familiar with such technology. These control mechanisms must require extensive calibration. Precise calibration ensures optimal performance parameters. Manual overrides allow real-time adjustments for dramatic pacing requirements. And backup protocols? Multiple redundancy systems prevent equipment failures that might compromise audience experience quality. Evelyn nodded thoughtfully, her tablet recording technical specifications that would have alarmed security personnel if they possessed sufficient technical knowledge to understand their implications. The neural interfaces controlling Zefkar's enhancements were sophisticated by hegemony standards, primitive by human measurements, and vulnerable in ways their designers had never considered. The morning's volunteer proved to be a Deltari philosopher whose crime was questioning resource allocation policies during a public forum. His species possessed natural telepathic abilities that Zefkar intended to exploit for maximum psychological impact. The crowd anticipated extended suffering delivered with artistic flair. Exquisite selection, commented Lord Vorthon, whose presence indicated significant political investment in the proceedings. Telepathic torture provides exceptional entertainment value while demonstrating consequences of seditious thinking. Quite educational, Evelyn agreed. Though I notice your champion seems to be experiencing some difficulty establishing psychological dominance. Indeed, something had gone wrong with Zefkar's usual intimidation routine. The Deltari philosopher was responding to threats with calm analysis rather than mounting terror. The champion's cybernetic rage amplifiers were firing at maximum intensity, but his target remained frustratingly unafraid. Technical anomaly, Thexanar muttered, frantically adjusting control parameters. Neural feedback? Systems are functioning within normal ranges. Perhaps your victim possesses unusual mental resilience, Evelyn suggested helpfully. Impossible. Psychological profiling confirmed optimal vulnerability characteristics. His fear responses should be escalating exponentially by now. But fear requires uncertainty, and uncertainty was currently in short supply. The Deltari philosopher was receiving information that completely altered his understanding of the situation. Someone was explaining Zefkar's enhancement systems, revealing the neural control interfaces, describing exactly how the champion's artificial rage was being generated and maintained. Someone was teaching him that monsters were just machines with better marketing. Fascinating development, Evelyn observed, as Zefkar's intimidation techniques grew increasingly frantic. Your champion appears to be losing confidence. Confidence parameters are regulated through automated systems. Manual degradation is impossible without… Thexanar stopped mid-sentence as the horrifying implications penetrated his cybernetically enhanced consciousness. Someone is interfering with our neural networks. The realization struck multiple officials simultaneously. Security teams scrambled toward technical stations, while Evelyn continued making academic observations about combat psychology. Her presence in restricted areas no longer seemed coincidental. Her questions about system vulnerabilities had not been academically motivated. Her credentials had been authenticated through databases that suddenly seemed far more sophisticated than anything a primitive species should possess. Dr. Morse, Lord Vorthon's voice carried the chill of someone recognizing they had been outmaneuvered by an opponent they had never noticed. What exactly is your area of academic specialization? Comparative xenosociology, with particular emphasis on systems analysis and cultural intervention methodologies. Her smile suggested she was enjoying herself immensely. I study how primitive societies can be guided toward more advanced developmental paradigms. In the arena below, Zefkar's psychological assault had completely collapsed. The Deltari philosopher was no longer cowering, but calmly explaining to the champion exactly how his cybernetic modifications worked, which neural pathways controlled his aggression, and why his artificially enhanced rage was preventing him from thinking clearly about tactical options. The crowd's bloodlust was transforming into confused murmuring as their invincible champion began exhibiting behavior patterns inconsistent with 3 years of brutal dominance. Zefkar was asking questions instead of dispensing violence, trying to understand why his victim knew more about his own enhancement systems than he did. This is impossible, Thexanar repeated, though repetition was failing to make the statement more accurate. Hegemony neural interface technology is beyond the comprehension of primitive species. Quite right, Evelyn agreed cheerfully. Fortunately, humans stopped being primitive some time ago. Your enhancement systems are actually based on research conducted by my grandfather's generation. We've made considerable improvements since then. The crowd was becoming restless as their carefully programmed entertainment experience deteriorated into something resembling actual philosophical discussion. Zefkar and his intended victim were engaged in conversation about the ethics of artificially induced aggression and the psychological damage caused by neural manipulation. The champion was discovering he possessed opinions about his treatment that had been suppressed by cybernetic behavioral controls. "You have been sabotaging our systems," Lord Vorthon accused, with the tone of someone stating an obvious fact. "I have been conducting comparative analysis of technological applications across different developmental paradigms," Evelyn corrected. "My research methodology requires hands-on examination of primitive control systems to understand their limitations and potential for improvement." Primitive. The word emerged as an electronic screech from multiple officials simultaneously. "Oh yes, your neural interface technology represents approximately the same sophistication level that humans achieved roughly 2 centuries ago. We abandoned such crude approaches when we developed more advanced methodologies for managing aggressive behavior." In the arena, Zefkar had completely abandoned his intimidation routine and was asking increasingly sophisticated questions about the philosophical implications of cybernetic modification. The Deltari philosopher was providing thoughtful responses that demonstrated genuine intellectual engagement rather than mortal terror. The crowd was experiencing something unprecedented in Nexus history: educational content that was actually educational. "This demonstration concludes my preliminary research phase," Evelyn announced to her increasingly alarmed audience. "Thank you for providing such comprehensive access to your operational systems. My findings should prove quite valuable for developing more advanced management approaches." "Management approaches?" Lord Vorthon's voice carried undertones of species-wide dread. "Oh yes. Humans have discovered far more effective methods for organizing entertainment systems and managing social control mechanisms. I believe your organization would benefit significantly from our consultation services." The cosmic joke was reaching its inevitable conclusion. The aliens had invited a human to observe their sophisticated approach to controlled violence, never realizing they were being evaluated by representatives of a species that had perfected such systems, grown bored with them, and moved on to more interesting challenges like turning their former victims into business partners. The boardroom emergency session convened 6 hours after what internal reports, euphemistically termed systemic entertainment failure. Attendance included every hegemony official with financial stake in Nexus operations, most of whom were discovering that panic looked remarkably similar across species boundaries. "Current estimates place revenue losses at 47 million credits," announced Kextura, the financial controller whose crystalline structure had developed stress fractures during the crisis. "Market confidence has declined by 38% since news of the incident reached trading algorithms." Lord Vorthon's appendages gestured with barely controlled fury. "One human academic has destabilized our most profitable entertainment venue. How is this mathematically possible?" "Actually," Evelyn interjected from her position at the conference table, "the mathematical models are quite elegant once you understand the underlying variables." Her presence at what should have been a private corporate crisis meeting had generated less surprise than might be expected. Security had discovered their access control systems contained authorization codes they didn't remember installing. Evelyn possessed documentation proving her legitimate presence at every restricted area she had visited. Her credentials had been verified through databases that shouldn't have existed but apparently did. "Dr. Morse," Lord Vorthon's tone suggested he was reconsidering his species' traditional politeness toward academic researchers. "Your continued presence is no longer required for your study completion." "On the contrary, my study has reached its most fascinating phase." Evelyn activated her tablet, projecting holographic displays that made several officials recoil. "I'm prepared to present my findings and recommendations for operational improvement." "We have no interest in human recommendations regarding hegemony entertainment infrastructure." "That's unfortunate, considering current market conditions." Evelyn's projection displayed real-time financial data that shouldn't have been accessible to external researchers. Your stock valuation has decreased 17% since this morning. Several major investors are reconsidering their positions. Temporary market fluctuation caused by isolated technical difficulties, Kexatura insisted, with the confidence of someone desperately hoping repetition would alter reality. I'm afraid the situation is considerably more complex. Evelyn's holographic data streams showed trading patterns, investor communications, and regulatory inquiries that painted a catastrophic picture. The Galactic Entertainment Commission has initiated formal investigation proceedings. 3 separate class action lawsuits have been filed by shareholders, and several of your corporate sponsors are requesting contract renegotiations. The silence that followed carried undertones of species-wide financial terror. Velnira was the first to recover verbal capability. How do you possess access to confidential corporate intelligence? Standard research methodology requires comprehensive data collection across all relevant institutional frameworks. Evelyn's explanation sounded entirely reasonable, despite being completely implausible. Human academic protocols emphasize thorough documentation. This exceeds academic documentation. This represents industrial espionage. Actually, it represents due diligence for potential acquisition targets. Evelyn's smile suggested she had been anticipating this conversation. Meridian Consolidated Entertainment has been evaluating Nexus operations for possible investment opportunities. The revelation struck the conference room like a fusion warhead, detonating inside a library. Meridian Consolidated was a human corporation whose entertainment subsidiaries had revolutionized recreational industries across 17 star systems. Their involvement in hegemony markets would represent cultural invasion on an unprecedented scale. Acquisition? Lord Vorthon's voice carried octaves of dismay previously thought impossible for his species. Quite comprehensive, actually. Evelyn activated additional displays showing legal documentation that several officials recognized despite preferring not to. MCE acquired controlling interest in Nexus Entertainment through a series of financial instruments that became executable under specific performance threshold violations. What performance thresholds? Public safety incidents resulting in audience endangerment, systematic fraud in competitive programming, failure to maintain advertised entertainment standards, and violation of Galactic Commerce Commission regulations regarding truthful marketing practices. The list continued for several minutes, each item supported by documented evidence of Nexus violations that had been occurring for years. Evelyn had not sabotaged their systems, so much as revealed existing sabotage that management had been perpetrating against their own customers. These acquisition clauses were never part of our corporate agreements, Kexatura protested weakly. Article 47 of the Standard Galactic Commerce Code requires automatic inclusion of consumer protection provisions in entertainment industry contracts. Your legal department apparently overlooked this requirement when filing corporate registration documents. No human corporation could possess sufficient financial resources to acquire Nexus Entertainment, Lord Vorthon declared, with the desperation of someone clinging to increasingly implausible hope. Evelyn's final holographic display showed transfer confirmations, banking authorizations, and regulatory approvals that rendered his objection academically interesting but practically irrelevant. Meridian Consolidated Entertainment officially assumed operational control of Nexus facilities at 0800 this morning. I've been appointed interim director pending full transition completion. The cosmic joke had reached its inevitable conclusion, with mathematical precision that would have impressed the very aliens who had been calculating entertainment outcomes for profit margins. They had invited a human to observe their sophisticated approach to organized violence, never suspecting they were being evaluated for corporate acquisition by a species that had long since industrialized such activities, perfected them, and eventually replaced them with more profitable alternatives. What happens to existing management personnel? Velnira asked, with the tone of someone discovering their professional future had been decided by forces beyond their comprehension. Comprehensive retraining programs will be provided for all employees willing to adapt to human operational standards. Evelyn replied with genuine warmth. Meridian's entertainment philosophy emphasizes employee satisfaction, customer safety, and sustainable profit models that don't rely on systematic exploitation. And if we decline participation in these retraining programs, excellent severance packages and glowing letters of recommendation for alternative employment opportunities. The boardroom gradually emptied as former Nexus executives contemplated career transitions they had never anticipated requiring. Evelyn remained, making final notes on her tablet about the most successful academic field study in xenoanthropological history. Tomorrow, the Nexus would reopen under human management with voluntary competitors, fair matches, and entertainment that didn't require anyone to die for audience satisfaction. The revolution would be so efficient that most customers would never notice the transition from barbarism to civilization. It was, she reflected, exactly the sort of educational outcome that made academic research worthwhile.